So it's based on a true story. And it's about a slave family in 1854 who the father can read and write. And so the master needs his help. So the master makes a promise. He says, if you come with me on the Oregon Trail, you help me with the books and help me set up my farm, when we get to Oregon, I will free you. But after they travel on the trail, when they get there, the master frees the parents, but keeps the kids. And in 1854, the slave parents sue for custody of their kids and win. And back then, you couldn't do that. A black person couldn't sue a white person in court. So it was a major case which determined whether the state of Oregon, or the territory of Oregon, came into the United States as a free state or a slave state. And because of that, all the other states, all the other territories on the West Coast came into the Union as free states. And Rosanne's going to tell us a little bit about the history of the Oregon Trail and slavery. And who can tell us, who knows what slavery is? Would someone want to tell us what it is?
Okay. Slavery is, for lack of a better word, when someone holds someone captive, usually against their will, to do labor.
That was great.
Excellent. That's a very good description. And the thing that we find interesting about slavery when we study it is it was different in the United States than it had been in the past. And many people say that's why slavery eventually ended, right? So in ancient Roman times, you know people had slaves, you read about that, right? Egyptians had slaves, everybody did. But back then, slavery happened because two different sides would battle in some war, and the dudes who lost had to be the slaves of the people who won. So that's a little bit like during the Super Bowl, if the team that lost then had to go and make breakfast for the dudes who won for the rest of their life. All right? Because that was how it was done. And that made it different in the ancient world because slaves were understood to be intelligent people who had skills. You could have your slave teach your child to play chess or to read or to write poetry. Right? But when we move over to the new world of what will become the United States, we change the rule. And it becomes, you know what, we're only going to go to this one other part of the world, and all the people there we're going to assume are needing to be slaves. And we're going to ship them over here, and suddenly we're not going to qualify them as people anymore. They're going to be property and legal papers, so they don't even have status as human beings. And when you do that to somebody, you start to believe clearly they can't be as good as you. No more are they someone that I've met in combat and might have beaten me. They're just somebody who's intended to help me all the rest of my life. And that destroys our respect for other people, right? And so that's called chattel slavery. And that's what was practiced in the United States. And that was practiced by the family that's in this book, right? So they are property in this man's world. And that's why when they travel, and he's made this deal, which is kind of interesting, why he would make this deal in the first place. But when he gets to the other side, he wants to be a good guy, which is really hard to do when you're already a slave owner. How are you also a good guy? But nobody thinks they're a bad guy, right? Nobody thinks they're the bad guy.
They're doing what's appropriate for the time.
Exactly. They're living up to everybody else's things. So he thinks he has to keep his word, so that's why he frees the parents, but it's like, I never mentioned your children, so I'm okay. I haven't broken my promise, have I? Right? So that's the interesting complexity we thought when we first started the story. Now, the other thing we wanted to say briefly about slavery, which is really important about the United States, is that many people don't realize we had the chance to end slavery at the very beginning, the time we signed the Declaration of Independence, which y'all are studying, right?
Yeah.
Right? Wonderful. Somebody tell me, what is the Declaration of Independence? Yeah, you can.
Declaration of Independence is the document that people sign.
That's very nice. Okay, that's good. Usually, and I'll tell you this, my college students sometimes make this confusion. They think the Declaration set up government, but it didn't. All it was a list, a declaration of the crimes committed by the King of England, which allowed us to break away from him. Right? And one of those crimes in the very original draft of the Declaration that Thomas Jefferson wrote said taking people from one country and making them slaves in another is a crime. And we don't like the king for doing that, so we get to leave. But that's not in the Declaration of Independence today. Because when Thomas Jefferson put that in there, all the other southern territories said, no, we're not going to sign a piece of paper that says that. And so he took it out. which means we started the country as a country that accepted slavery. But we had a moment where we could have let it be, right then. So for me, that's what's so significant. We could have ended it right there, but instead, we had to have the Civil War, which I will be doing in a couple of weeks. So this is how these two wars are tied together. One needn't have happened if the question had been answered first.
And this family, one of the things we liked about the story was that this family travels on the Oregon Trail. How many of you have heard about the Oregon Trail?
Good teaching.
Yes. What do you know about it? Do you want to tell us a little bit what the Oregon Trail is?
The Oregon Trail is well, a trail that people travel to get to a place.
Excellent, to get to Oregon. It started, Rose, can we get that map up? It started in Independence, Missouri, and it went 2,000 miles across the country to the territory of Oregon. And the reason this family wanted to take it was because in order to get people to come to Oregon, the territory of Oregon said, we will give you free land. So people traveled, they traveled this route. It took them months to do it, and it's a route that now if we went in a car, it would take us, what, 4 days? If we went on a plane, it would take us 4 hours. So they would start, and they would go all the way through. And there were places they would stop along the way. Independence Rock. Does anyone know what Independence Rock is? Oh, I see a hand. What is Independence Rock?
Independence Rock is a place where people stop and they carve their name in it.
That's excellent. So many people don't know that. There was a rock along the way. I think we have a picture of it called Independence Rock. And the people who were in the wagon trains would stop and they would carve their name in the rock to let people who were coming after them know, we've made it this far. Going on the Oregon Trail was a very difficult, dangerous, treacherous thing to do. There were lots of things they could encounter. So these are actual this is a picture of people's actual carvings into the rock. When you went on the trail, you were usually in a carriage or a wagon, which was pulled by oxen. And often you had all your belongings that you could bring. Oftentimes people pack too many things and then they have to throw them out of their wagons along the way. And the whole trail was littered with people's things, with a piano, with your china, with all these things you thought you would need in the New World, but didn't.
Did any of you ever go to the Autry Museum in Griffith Park with your parents? They have a whole room of stuff people left behind on the trail. Really fascinating, the things they thought they could carry. And then you get halfway there and suddenly you figure out, if the oxen die along the way, I have to pull the wagon by myself. So I think I'll throw away all these things I thought I needed because I want the oxen to make it to the other side. It's a very scary moment there, definitely. And we have that in the book, which is what we were interested in.
And one of the other things, which for our family, they were slaves. They were used to being treated in a certain way. But when they got to the Oregon Trail, the people traveling on the trail came from lots of different backgrounds. Some of them had come over through through New York. They were immigrants who were coming across the country. Some had come from the East Coast, some had come from the West Coast, not the West Coast, the South. And they traveled across the country all going to the West Coast. So you brought together lots of different types of people with lots of different beliefs and lots of different religions. And one of the things that this family met along the way, they met Quakers. Does anyone know what a Quaker is? Wow. Yes?
Well, Quakers are just people who believe in the religion of Quakers.
Quaker.
Yeah.
Or they,
Okay. And what's something that Quakers believe in that didn't match what the Southerners believed in?
They have a more strict belief in God.
yes, they did believe strictly in God. And they had certain things
Got it
that
over here.
Well, they believe in witchcraft.
No, they were considered witches by some people. They believed something was wrong that the Southerners believed was okay.
They believed all people were created.
Exactly.
There you go. Not just slaves. They believed women were equal to men, which was awfully early for anyone to be believing.
Yes. So those Quakers on the trip believed that everyone should be treated equally. So one of the things our family finds on the trail is that some people got to ride in the wagons, but all of the children had to walk for the most part.
Oh yes, walking from Missouri to Oregon. You start now.
Cross country.
Let's see how far we all get.
Yes. And many of the women had to too sometimes. So it was a different experience for our family because They were used to only the slaves having to do the difficult things. We're going to read a chapter, I'm going to read a chapter from the book. It's actually the first chapter, and it's set on a plantation in Louisiana. And one of the things that set this family apart was that the father knew how to read and write. And because he did, his daughter had started to pick up bits and pieces of it. And this is her talking about her love of books. Saturday mornings, Mary's job was to dust the books in the Holmes library. Each time she began by standing in the middle of the room and staring in awe at all of the books around her. Mary loved reading, but it was more than that. It was the idea of owning so many books, so much of anything that thrilled her. Mary wondered how it would feel to own something of her own. Everything she had ever cleaned, cooked, or cared for belonged to someone else, even her parents, even herself. It was 1854, and Mary was a slave on the Holmes plantation. Mary was 9 years old. She climbed the ladder and took down the largest book in the collection, an old leather-bound Bible. She poured some linseed oil on the cloth and rubbed the cover gently. The oil moistened the cracks in the binding and shined for a moment, then it dried. Before putting the Bible back on the shelf, Mary opened it. She ran her fingers over the first column, trying to recognize the words. She sounded them out slowly as she spoke. God saw how good the light was. Then night came, and morning followed. The first day, Buddy completed the sentence from memory as he entered the library, startling Mary. You trying to scare me to Jesus, Buddy? Mary demanded. Of course not, Buddy answered. Just bringing coal in to start Miss Dorothea's fire. Buddy took his bucket of coal and spread it in the fireplace. Buddy was a year older than Mary. They had been friends all of their lives. Lucky was me came in first and not the mistress. Guess I am at that, Mary said gratefully. Can I help? Nah, Buddy said as he lit the coals. Unless you want to keep reading. Every time I hear it, I put a little to memory. I'm up to the 5th day. Mary scanned the page until she found the word 5th. Then she read, I will make man in my own image. Mary wrinkled her brow and wondered, does that mean God looks like us? No, God ain't no slave, Buddy said. Bible says he's owner of heaven and earth. Then he looks like Master Holmes, Mary asked. Shh, Buddy said. Someone's coming. Mary looked at the ladder across the room. There was no time to put the Bible back on the high shelf. She and Buddy ducked behind the sofa instead. Mary heard her mistress, Miss Dorothea, enter the library, go to the piano, and begin her daily music practice. Mary looked at Buddy. She made a funny face. He made one back. There had been many visitors to the big house who played the piano well. Miss Dorothea had not learned much from them. How long will she play? Whispered Buddy. I gotta get back to the field or Mr. Bostrick will miss me. Sometimes she stays all morning, Mary told him. Buddy's face turned serious. Mary reached out to hold his hand and whispered, not always. It didn't seem to help his worrying. Dorothea! The master's voice boomed. Mary heard 2 steps of footsteps approach. Do you have to do that this morning? I'm trying to talk to Robin here, man to man, the master said. Now it was Mary whose face turned serious. Robin was her pa. He was tall and sturdy, with skin the color of molasses and arms as big as Mary's waist. He was the plantation blacksmith. If the master had called him to the library, it meant trouble. I need my practice timer, Miss Dorothea said, as she continued banging out mismatched notes. It's all right, Master, Pa said to Master Holmes. She heard him speak in the quiet, obedient tone he used with the master. It was different from how he spoke to his family or other slaves. I accept. Cautiously, Mary peered from behind the sofa and saw something she had never seen before. Buddy, Mary whispered. They're shaking hands. Let me see, Buddy said, as he tried to peer around her. But as he looked out, the men were already leaving the room. What was that about, Mary wondered. The sound of the piano made it impossible to think. Finally, Miss Dorothea's practice ended and she left the room. Mary and Buddy hurried and returned the Bible to the bookshelf and ran from the room. I mentioned earlier was that this was a radio show originally for National Public Radio. Does anyone know what National Public Radio is? Heard it before? Anyone? Anyone heard it?
Car on the whistle.
Okay, so the radio show was done as part of a series at the Wells Fargo Western Heritage Radio, Wells Fargo Museum. It was the Wells Fargo Western Heritage Radio Theater Series, which is the hardest title in the world to say. And one of the things they said was that you could choose any story in history, it just had to be family friendly and historically accurate. And this was the story that I found and loved. And when I wrote it originally, I got a call from a studio saying we wanted to see this as a movie. And so we put together the material and we went in and it almost became a TV movie. It came very close to becoming a TV movie. And then didn't, like many things in Hollywood. And so we decided we loved the story so much, and we had done another book together that was published traditionally, that we decided we wanted to do this our own way. So we adapted the radio show. Who can tell me what an adaptation is? All right, someone back?
Yes. Really.
I guess it's when you take it and you change it a little bit and you pass it off with your own.
Well, that is a plagiarism. Passing it off as your own gets into taking someone else's work.
Yeah.
But an adaptation, there you had points of it.
Yes.
Excellent. You had points of it. You take one piece of work in one form and you change it to another. So we took it from a radio show and we changed it to
First to a movie.
to a movie,
From a movie
and then
to a
to a book. Okay?
Exactly.
And we write together, and we write together in a very strange way. Now I know a lot of you do projects together, right? Group work, right? Group work, okay? And you write with other people, okay? And that's called a, starts with a C.
Collaboration.
This is collaboration.
Nice.
And so in our collaboration, we together sit down and we write out the story. And then we break up the outline and she writes half and I write half. And then we come back together and we make the book sound like one person.
Well, because we write every other chapter. It's not
Yes.
like we do the first 50 pages, the next 50.
Yes.
It's like one back and forth. So there's a little flow of voice. You know what a voice is for a writer?
Yes,
Very
yes. Who
important.
can tell me what a voice is? Actually, I want to hear what you think was.
A voice of a writer is their own personal opinion of what they're writing.
Or their own sound, or their own, making the character sound like themselves.
The person's opinion, the person's idea.
Coming through the story, absolutely, the person's opinion or idea coming through the story. One more? All right. So we would blend it together, and I type, and because I wouldn't let her type, because back in the day before there were touch screens,
I touch the screen all the time.
Yes,
I'm thinking, I point to things on the screen.
But
It makes her crazy.
But one of the reasons a collaboration works, and our collaboration of writing the promised work, is because we trust that the most important thing in doing your project is the story. You want the story to be the best. So it's not about her winning or about me winning, it's about telling the best story. And in doing an adaptation, we always make sure the research is most important, the story is important. Sometimes you change things when you adapt it to make it work. So one of the things in the promise that we changed was the part of the slave being able to read and write actually came from my great-great-grandfather who could read and write. He was a slave on the Comer plantation in Alabama, which was owned by Governor Comer. And he was able to read and write because he grew up with the master's son. And that allowed him and his family after that to be able to do a little better in life because they were able to read and write. So we put that in the story in our adaptation. The other thing was a Quaker family. I knew a Quaker family growing up, and while we realized there were a lot of Quakers who traveled on the trail, and their influence made people more accepting on the trail, that was also something that we pulled from my life to put into the story. And then we wanted to deal with American expansionism. That's a big phrase. Does anybody know what that means? Yeah.
It means America wants to expand to new lands.
Exactly. The concept of from sea to shining sea, right? There's also the concept of manifest destiny, which meant we had a right to own all the land from one end to the other
We
side.
thought we had a right to
Well,
own land.
That's what it means.
Yes.
Exactly. And so this was what started the idea of the Oregon Trail, right? Somebody like Jefferson felt that we had to have land. Every person should own their own plot of land to grow their own food on. And this is going to make them a good citizen because they cared for the place, because they owned it, right? So as we ran out of land on the East Coast, because, you know, more people got married and more people had children, and pretty soon it was very busy, they kept moving west and west and west. Why we're all here in California. How do you think we ended up in California? This wasn't originally part of the Founding Fathers' land. So the Oregon Trail helped move Americans west. And that's what the Holmes family that we wrote about, imagine, he lived in a beautiful place, yet he wanted more. So he figured, I'll try going over there and getting even more land. But sadly, along the way, he lost most of what he had.
And people traveling from one part of the country to another back then. I mean, now we hop on a plane and we go. Or we get in a car, we go on a train, and it's very easy. But when you're traveling on the Oregon Trail, there are lots of things you had to encounter. What do you think they ate on the trail?
I would say probably dried up meat or some plants or like some vegetables or fruits they stored overnight that are like so moist.
You're exactly right on dried things. And today we have such a much wider variety of dried things.
But what did they have for breakfast?
Let me see. They had beans and bacon and coffee and biscuits.
Everyone, including the kids. What do you think they had for lunch? Anyone want to guess the lunch menu? Yes.
Beans, bacon, biscuits,
Exactly.
Were you there?
Dinner.
And dinner.
What do we think?
The same thing for lunch and breakfast.
Absolutely.
Every day.
For months.
For a couple of months at a time.
Yes. And how do we think they cooked their beans? Yes.
Well, I remember in the story that they had to smash the piano to get the wood.
Yes, they often had
They
to.
had to get wood to make fire.
Yes, they often had to break up their own personal belongings to start the fire to use wood, but they also had another way.
They had a, yes.
I remember in 3rd grade, I was told that they used the oxen, like dried up food.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yes, I'm trying to think of a better way to phrase it than dried up food. But basically, buffalo chips, thank you. They would burn buffalo chips, which probably was not a very good smell. No.
And guess who collected the product that would be burned at the end of the day? The children, with a little basket on your hand, walking behind the animals as the...
But they were very ingenious because there were lots of ways they learned to feed themselves on the trail. For example, they would take the milk and put it in a bucket, and they would attach it to the bottom of the wagon. So as the wagon was going, the cream was going back and forth and back and forth. And what do you think they had at the end? Butter.
Very good. Very good.
Exactly.
So they were very creative in order to do this.
And yet, out of the 350,000 to 500,000 people who went on the trail, about 10% of them died. That was a lot of people. And it was because they didn't eat the healthiest things. It was a difficult trail. What were some of the things you think they might have died from?
They might have died by, like I can see in that picture right now, there's lots of cliffs and sharp, and then like there's probably lots of rocks, and then there might be like shortage of food.
Well, that's a very good point about the rocks. There were lots of accidents, wagons that broke, getting stuck in the mud, getting drowned in crossing rivers.
Let's grab somebody way in the back. Way in the back, the young girl in the gray. Yeah.
Well, like angry Indians attacking them.
They had to deal with Indian attacks. What are some other reasons they might not have made it?
Yes. They may have died from diseases.
Yes. 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 And now, before we started, the two of you mentioned something you saw in the pictures. You think we can find that picture?
Don't off the top of my head.
Oh, okay, that's okay. What did you see in one of the
We
pictures?
saw a little girl with rickets.
Yeah, with her legs
because
Yes.
I said it's
Not
straight.
very well.
So there were lots of diseases. There were rickets. There was smallpox. There was pneumonia. People didn't make it through childbirth sometimes. So there were lots of challenges along the way. And we thought that was an interesting thing to put in a story because it shows just how hard this family worked on the trail to get their freedom. And then they didn't get it. And they had to use a legal method in order to do so.
And what's interesting about the legal method, we thought, again, in Oregon at that time, the territory was debating, do we want to be a slave state or a free state, right? We had a little rule for a while in the United States. Anytime one territory wanted to enter, they had to have two territories. One would be slave and one would be free, so that everything in the government was balanced, so nobody could outvote each other, all right? So that was their deal, so you had to decide. And there was an opportunity for the West Coast. California itself could have been a slave state. You ever drive up near Bakersfield? We grow cotton in California. And cotton was a crop that required slave labor, right? So this was a possibility. And people had both sides of the argument. And luckily, in the case that Mary's family went through, the judge happened to be an abolitionist. You know what that is? Wow, that's not bad. Who hasn't spoken yet? In the back with the headband, yes. That's my question. Does anybody know? Otherwise, we'll tell you. You got what?
An abolitionist is someone who wants to abolish or destroy slavery.
Exactly, exactly. And we had those people from the very
Did everyone
beginning.
hear her? An abolitionist is someone who wants to abolish or destroy slavery.
Exactly, right? And we had people, the Adams family, not the ones who go politically, but John Adams and his family were abolitionists in their own right from New England, and they actually had a place for the Underground Railroad, which is a whole other book we have to write. But, so people from the very beginning of the country were against it, but they needed enough people on their side to overturn the idea. So in our case, in this story, the judge had abolitionist sentiments, is how they would phrase it back in the day. And so he could have judged either way on this case. But he chose to judge for the slave family to point out that that's the side he was on and the side Oregon should be on.
And he did it based on the testimony of Mary, the 9-year-old girl who's the heroine of the book, because we really wanted to have a little girl as a strong heroine in a story. And we thought that Mary's story was a good one to tell. Exactly.
Do you want to go for it? Yeah, we have a couple minutes to see if anybody has any questions. Yeah, right away.
Well, about the abolitionists, I am in a play, our whole class is in a play.
Oh, fun.
And I am describing one of the, John Brown, which is an abolitionist.
Oh, John Brown is a fascinating story. Historians are all confused as to whether he was brilliant or crazy. What do y'all think from reading about him? He's a tough guy. He had a play, exactly. But that was the problem. People were getting tired of not having legal solutions to slavery, and so they started to get violent. And John Brown is one of the cases of violence. I was fascinated, loved it. John Brown's from Ohio. I'm from Ohio, so that's what I studied in Ohio history. In the same grade y'all do California history. Very fun. Yeah, way in the back. What do you got?
Where can we buy the book?
Oh, what a lovely question.
It's on Amazon. You can get it in paperback or in Kindle. And we're also going to give ones to your, we're donating books to the classroom, all the classrooms.
Yeah, all your
have
class, your class set, so you can borrow one from your teacher. Very good. Thank you for that question. Yes, in the middle.
Where can you find that book? Like, is it in libraries or?
It is not yet, but we're in the process of doing that. But it will be in your classroom.
Okay, let's go here. She has it. Yeah.
Oh, certainly.
Yes.
Certainly.
Lack of water was a huge issue along the trail. And so people, they carried what they could in their wagons, but after that ran out, they collected. But sometimes it was contaminated.
You had to ration it to people so that there'd be enough to last. Exactly.
Did people die of things like food poisoning on the trail?
That would happen. Exactly. Think about how old, if you're taking dried bacon and other foods and they sit for a long time, what if it rains and stuff gets wet, then it gets moldy and that's all you've got to eat? Yes?
Were there also poisonous animals on the trail?
There were, obviously, rattlesnakes when you come out west and whatnot, so danger and things like that was certainly part of what could happen to you.
How long did it take for you guys to write the book?
Oh, what a fun question. Probably, but counting
Yeah, see,
outward.
because it had been in another form and we adapted it, it took, it's hard to say exactly how long it took. I would say the book itself probably took 3 months, but we had already had the story because it had been in another form. Yes?
How long is the book in the trail?
About 2,000 miles, yeah.
Just about, yeah. So start walking now. You'll be done. How long will it take us all to walk 2,000?
If you don't leave now, you'll be caught in the mountains in the snow.
There you go, exactly. And then that's another whole Downer Party novel. But imagine, we can't walk like from here to downtown Los Angeles generally. We aren't doing that in our lives, right?
Can people also die of starvation?
They did. Well, they did. It depended on how poorly prepared they were, or well prepared they were, actually.
Yep. And if your family didn't bring enough, and they had to start deciding who to give the food to, and some people got left behind on the trail if they were too sick to bring forward, so they would die by themselves.
That's sad.
It was not a pretty thing.
What's the deal about that problem for them?
It was, and so this just mentioned, you know, you had to time it correctly. There was always someone who led the wagon train. And you had to time your passing so that you would get through the mountains before the snow would come. The Donner Party, yes. Anyone hear of the Donner Party? Yes, the Donner Party.
It's like in a video game, right?
In California history, I don't know if you've covered the Donner Party yet, but it was people in a wagon train who did not make it because they got stuck in the snow in the mountains. And we actually talk about that in the book.
Yeah, they get scared about that.
Yes.
Would the wagons keep on going at night, or would they stop and...
So they would stop to sleep because you'd arrest the animals. Forget about the people. The children could still be tired, nobody cared. If the oxen got tired, you're in trouble. They needed good rest, and you had to make sure they had all the food they needed, or they weren't going to keep working, so they would rest at night.
So this is kind of a connection. In 3rd grade, I did a play called The Incredible Westward Movement, and it was kind of about everyone moving west.
What did you like about that play? What did you learn from doing that play?
Well, I learned a little bit more on why people started moving west and why they came to California in the first place, and it really helped.
Cool. So your play was The Incredible Westward Movement. One of the things on this, although on the map you see, the map takes you to Oregon, but actually at a certain point in the road, you could veer off, and there were people who actually went to California, because what was the big thing back in the 1800s in California? We can all say it at once. So there were people who thought, oh, they would be traveling the Oregon Trail, they were going to go to Oregon, they were going to get land, but then they heard people talking along the way, oh, you can get gold in California, you can get rich doing that, and they would veer off. Many times those people didn't even make it there, let alone when they did get there, many times they didn't get gold. Most of the people who made money and became wealthy going to California for gold were the ones who built the supply stores, the ones who sold you the clothes to wear, the tools, all of that.
If you wear Levi jeans, that's because Levi was a failed gold miner. Levi Strauss was a failed gold miner, couldn't find gold, but he realized that if he could sell these pants, he could make a lot of money, and his great-great-grandchildren are still making money from that idea, are they not? Brilliant! Brilliant when you think about it.
Yes.
If any people died along the way, they would kind of
No, that's the Donner Party story. They had nothing else to eat. They would bury you properly, but there were no cemeteries. They would attempt to do the best they could, but of course you have to bury people at least 6 feet under, or wild animals will dig them up. So they had to take some time if they had the time. Yeah.
We have time for probably about two more questions.
Whatever is good for you guys. Gentleman in the center.
In the Donner Party, how did they decide who got eaten?
Whoever died of natural causes first. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of the kid who falls asleep at the sleeping party and gets the shaving cream on their face. Yeah. Don't fall asleep first. Little girl over there, you haven't said anything yet.
Well, if these sort of died of natural causes, why would they eat them if they knew they had still a bunch of bacteria on them?
Because if you have nothing else to eat, you're not that picky.
Question.
That's a really good one.
Okay.
That's thinking.
Should we do the last one?
Are we good? We're good?
Should we do one more?
One more. Go for it.
Okay. Okay, Barbie.
It's actually about the gold rush, connection. You know how you said about the merchants making money and they were the ones who got rich? A boy in my class, his name is Joseph. He was my partner for this California history project, and we did the gold rush, and I found out that merchants made more money than slaves.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I love how you make the connections, and that's one of the things we want you to do when you read the story. Because even though the story is fiction, it's based on truth, and there's a lot of research in it, which connects to things like that.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to say one more thing about the gold rushes because y'all brought it up, and I think it's a really neat thing to think about being Californians. I'm from Ohio, like I said. The gold rush is what brought all the international people to California in the beginning, right? And we've always had waves of people from other countries. So the diversity that we get to experience in California is a very special, cool thing that you don't necessarily find in the center of the country. And it's all because first people came for gold, and then they liked it here and they stayed. And then moved forward in history and we come for World War II, and then we stayed. But it's really lovely. It's amazing. It's something that y'all should really, really be excited about because it's not true in my schools back in Ohio. So very cool. Very cool.
Thank you.
I think that's pretty much our presentation on the Oregon Trail. Don't forget that you can